Numbers is walking through the wilderness with Jesus. That's what it's about. And I think we'll see that's true as we go through the book. That the first generation, this group that walked, will see that Jesus was with them. But the New Testament draws parallels for us. That we are saved from slavery, as they were, slavery to sin, that was our Egypt. And we then wander through the wilderness, pilgrim in this barren land. But Jesus is with us and he takes us into the eternal promised land. But there's a few challenges on the way. But here we are still at Mount Zion. No, we're not at Mount Sinai. We haven't got anywhere near Zion yet. So we're at Mount Sinai. And we're not going to leave there until mid-chapter 10. And more strange is that and if you're very eagle-eyed, the beginning of chapter 7, it says, on the day when Moses had finished setting up the tabernacle. So that's actually predates chapter 1 of the book. So it's actually taken us to the middle of Exodus. So this is a flashback, this reading. But sort of logically and theologically, it makes sense to put it here. Now, we want to get on with the journey, don't we? We just want to do something to get on with it. The journeys, especially when we get to the destination. But first, we have these first 8 chapters, or 9.5 chapters, really. But these first 8 chapters, before the journey, we have to be right with God. We need to be rightly ordered as his people, rightly ordered in worship. And we need to know our identity and our purpose. And the purpose to prepare ourselves for the journey ahead. So chapters 1 to 4, we saw how the camp was very specifically ordered by God, how the tribes arranged themselves around the tabernacle, and we saw these squares of holiness. So the tabernacle itself is designing these squares of holiness, and then the tribes outside of that, with the Levites, puts a ring around the tabernacle. If you remember the diagram. Chapters 5 to 6 was about holiness before God. That's a very practical matter. And then at the end of chapter 6, we paused and focused on Aaron's blessing, where God puts the blessing we saw with God himself, that God turns to look to us and to shine on us and put his name on us. That actually tied in when we did the kids' talk on the creed this morning. James was talking about putting baptism as putting a name, God's name on you. So this kind of flows from that. And there's 3 purposes I think we can draw from these verses. 3 purposes before we go on the journey. 3 things that we do as a church and as Christians as we go out with God. And they are sacrifice in chapter 7, speaking and shining, both began with S, and I couldn't choose between them, in 7:89 to 8:4, and then service in 8:5 to the end of that chapter. So first we have, is sacrifice in chapter 7. It's a long chapter, but it's very repetitive, so we don't have to go over the same ground. But a few observations and then some applications as we go. Now, I've been saying this since I've been here, but a bit of basic Bible maths. Where do we find Numbers 7?
After number 6.
After number 6. Very specifically, after the very end of number 6. Yeah, so chapter 7 comes after the end of Numbers 6. So sacrifice comes after blessing, not the other way around. So sacrifices are not to get stuff from God. It's not if I sacrifice to God, I will get from him, which I think is at my default thinking. But they flow rather from being blessed from God. And we sacrifice from what he gives us. And this is repeated all over the Bible. So, for example, the 10 Commandments, when the 10 Commandments come, they come after they're rescued from Egypt. Because Exodus 20 is before Exodus 1 to 19. And at the very beginning of the 10 Commandments reminds you of that. And so this blessing and then this sacrifice has a purpose, which is to enable worship. And notice they don't distinguish between giving to God and giving to the Levites. So we might in our mind think, am I giving to God or am I giving to church or a missionary to a person? It's seen as part of a whole. So we give to God, but normally when we give to God, whether it's in our hearts we give to God, practically it's often giving to people for his service, isn't it? So the Levites were to lead and enable worship. And the gifts here are, my notes I was reading them might seem a bit odd, basically transport and resources for sacrifice. So the Levites could do their work. And there's different aspects to the worship reflected in what they gave. Now, we've not gone into the detail now. We thought about this years ago when we looked at Leviticus. But often as Christians, we just think sacrifice means atonement and forgiveness of sins. And that's vital. And that's what it happens on the cross. It's fulfilled on the cross. But also, there are other sacrifices and offerings. So some of them are about offering yourself to God as a pleasing smell that goes up to God. Some are called a fellowship offering. So what would happen is an offering would be divided into three. So a bit is offered up to God and burnt up. That means it's God's bit of the offering. Another bit you gave to the Levites and they ate it. And another bit you sat down and ate with your family. It doesn't sound like much of an offering, but the idea is it's a fellowship. It's a meal between you and your family and the Levites and God. You're all eating together, saying God wants to eat with you. So these sacrifices, some of these sacrifices are here, and various other things, they all help us. The reason why they matter to the Christian is that they help us see more of Jesus and his work more fully. It's not just that he forgives you your sins. That's a big deal. But there's more than that, so that he wants to have fellowship with you. He wants you. And then there's the transport. So remember the game on a journey. Now, they don't know this at this stage. It should take about 2 weeks. It ends up taking 40 years. But they're going on a journey, carrying a lot of stuff. So imagine, most weeks as a church, we meet at CPC, at LU, CPC is LU. And we can't leave stuff there. We have to cart everything in and take it back every week. Imagine doing that without cars. Imagine going from Egypt to the Promised Land without ox and carts. It would have been a nightmare. So to that end, what they're offering is practical. So in verses 3 to 9, Moses assigns different numbers of ox to each division of Levi, apart from the Kohathites, who get none. So it's not how big or how important you are. The Kohathites were the most important, but practically who carries the most stuff, and the heaviest stuff. So you have the sacrifices and grain that are needed for day-to-day function of the tabernacle, and the carts to get it. So especially with the carts, it looks like a case of people have looked at them and seen what is needed, and they've gone to meet the need. And it's wonderful when God's people give that way to church, isn't it? You see something and you go, there's a need there. I'm going to give, not just going to give money like I normally do, which is needed, but I'm going to give for that specific thing because I can see a need. So it's from the heart. It's great when things come from the heart and are met. But they can't entirely do as they please. Because notice it's also as directed by God. So the Kohathites, you notice, aren't allowed to use a cart. It's a bit unfair, isn't it? It's a bit like saying, Howard tends to bring the sound with it, and he brings it in his cart. And Nick and Stella bring flasks of hot water, but David, who brings the projection stuff, has to carry it. Can't use the cart. That's rather strange, but that's what God does here. The Kohathites are not allowed to use a cart because they have to carry the ark themselves on poles. And unfair. 2 Kings chapter 6. And what happens there is David sends the order to move the ark to Jerusalem. And and that's where they're going to build the temple, the ark's going to build the temple. And to move the ark, they put it on a cart pulled by an ox. And on the way, it wobbles. And as it wobbles, poor old Uzzah, Levite, puts his hand out to stop it falling over. And he drops dead. And what's the first thing you think? He's only trying to help. How unfair. The point is, does God need your help? And more to the point is, what was the ark doing on a cart pulled by ox? The Levites were commanded to carry it. They're carrying God's presence in a way that God has not said to carry it. Now, the point for us is that it's not up to us how we worship God. You may have seen that meme, if you do social media, Francis Chan. He said people come up to him and say, I didn't really enjoy the worship this morning. And he went, well, that's okay, because we weren't worshipping you. It's not up to us how we worship God. There are things that God says, do it like this. And do you know what we should do then? We should do it like that. It's not quite enough to say, it doesn't say we can't do it. That's not a great operating principle. And I notice that most Christians have some version of this in their mind, just don't always push it very far. There are some things that we do because God tells us to do. There are some things we do because we do it sort of by implications from what else we've been told. But we order the church and we order the worship of the church as God directs, not quite as we fancy. Now notice as well, though, that sacrifices are sacrificial, which is another thing about, do I like it? It's got to be sacrificial. So they are costly. Worship isn't giving God your spare change. Now, Christ fulfilled the sacrificial system. That's why we don't bring animals in and kill them in our services. But that does not mean that there are no sacrifices that we make. In the New Testament, praise, so the verbal declaration of praise, our good works, our financial offerings, are in and through Christ, but they are sacrifices. Particularly, finance is often called a pleasant aroma to God. So it's like a burnt offering. Your time, your service is all sacrificial. It's meant to be joyful and from the heart, but also costly. Now, as we've seen, it's a response to God's already done the blessing, but He's blessed you. And then from that comes, from the heart, comes the sacrifice. But a faith that doesn't cost you anything is worth asking questions about. We use software for these when the hymn words come up. One that I used at a previous church was called Easy Worship, and I thought, what an unfortunate name for a piece. It was really easy to use, but what an unfortunate name for a piece of worship software. But then notice, and this is very numbers, all this worship is done together. That's why this chapter is so long and repetitive. So we've got these details I read in verses 1 to 11, and then they're repeated from verses 12 to 88 again and again and again. So it repeats exactly the same thing 12 times, apart from it's a different day and it's a different tribal leader. So each day they brought the same thing. So each time you get the name of the tribe and the chieftain that leads them 12 times. And we're not just told that that's happened, they repeat it exactly the same 12 times. So we feel it. So some things each tribe brought the same. Some things they brought in pairs. So two tribes would bring something between them, which means there'd be some cooperation and coordination between the tribes. But notice they all brought the same thing. They're not all the same size. There's significant differences in tribal size, but they all brought the same thing because they all have an equal share. They all have a stake in the worship of Israel. Nobody can be excused for not having, you haven't paid your way or anything like that. They've all got, no one can say they've got greater ownership. They all have a share. And it shows again what we saw right at the beginning is that communities are normally either edge-bound or centre-focused. The church is edge-bound and centre-focused. We know who we are, and we're focused on what we're doing, which is the worship of God. So we focus on the worship of God, but we also know who belongs. We know who the church is, and it's a church affair. Each has a part to play. Some are obvious. So, obviously we need one person playing the piano and a couple playing the guitar and one person preaching at the moment. But worship and the function of the church is a whole community affair. Everyone's got their part to play. It's from the heart, it's practical, but it's also as God directs it. And each person in the church has a stake and a share in it. So church is not meant to have bystanders. It has visitors, and that's wonderful, but ideally there's no bystanders. I did think actually right in chapter 1, I should have said it, sometimes you get the Levites, they're all given their little jobs to do as they move the tabernacle. And it's like when the 6 o'clock service ends at ARU, everyone just knows which bit they pick up and which car it goes in. And someone's on holiday and someone else just picks up and takes that bit forward. And even different things that come together. It's quite a good image of what's happening here in Numbers. The second thing is speaking and shining. So the first thing is sacrifice. The next thing is speaking and shining. That's the end of chapter 7 and start chapter 8. So the climax of chapter 7 is verse 88, when God speaks to Moses. So sacrifice is significant. Sacrifice, though, is not the end, but a means of fellowship. Sacrifice gets fellowship. And fellowship is friendship. And the heart of friendship is speaking and listening. So the mercy seat, which is on the lip of, so the ark is a big box with the Ten Commandments. And it has a lid with two cherubim, which is like big angels, and their wings touch in the middle. And that's where they put the sacrifice of atonement was there. The idea that God looks down and our sins are blotted out by a sacrifice. But also, that's where God spoke to Moses. So the place of sacrifice is where God's word comes from. So the tabernacle is like a portable Garden of Eden or a portable mountain of God. It is a portable where you meet God. And in Eden, God spoke to Adam and Eve, but they're cast out of Eden and they're kept out of Eden by a cherub. So here, Moses is hearing back to Eden through the cherubs. Notice it says Moses hears it. The way this is written, it sounds like the voice is distinct from God, like the voice is his own person. So this part of the fellowship is in chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. They've got Aaron's blessing, we looked at a couple of weeks ago. And that blessing is that God's face is turned to us and shines on us. And he talks to us, or to the people then, via Moses. But his face shines. And look at chapter 8, verses 1 to 4. So the inner court in the tabernacle, this would have been very dark. There's no windows. So practically, you have a lampstand and it lights it up. You can see what they're doing. But see, the focus on the detail, among all the other things they could focus on, because this flows from hearing God's voice. So we have a lot of the style of the lamp. It's gold and it's hammered. It's not gold plate, it's hammered gold. That represents God and his glory, and then it shines. And where does it shine? Well, the next bit of furniture, doesn't mention it here, but the next bit of furniture in the room is the table with the 12 loaves on. And the 12 loaves represent the 12 tribes. So the idea that they are present and near God. Specifically, their offering is near God. And so here the light of God shines on them. So the architecture of the tabernacle, and of the temple later, shows the truth of Aaron's blessing in the end of chapter 6. God is speaking to them and shining on his people, and he's delighted in their offerings. So as a church, we don't need this representation. We don't need a building that has this in it, because Christ is that word who was and is of God. And he is the light. And he is the tabernacle in John 1:14. Now, the one who said, I am the light of the world, is also the one who said to us, you are the light of the world. Not because intrinsically you are, for you in your own, you've got your own spark, but we are because he, by his Spirit, is in us and united to us. And in Revelation, it talks about Jesus walking among the lampstands, which represent the Spirit-filled churches. In other words, right now, here, even with the heating still only just coming on, right now, here, Jesus walks among us. And what he does right now as we worship, he is the light shining on us, and he is the one speaking his word to us. He is that word being spoken to us. And we saw in the end of number 6, when it says God, the blessing and his light, his face shining upon you, is the same as the baptism thing in Matthew 28, that he puts his name on us. That's what he's doing. But as he shines and speaks to us, so we are to reflect that and to shine to the world with our distinct lives and by speaking his words. So first, we need this light and word into us That's what a worship service is getting it into us. And then as we go out, we've got something to give out. Like oxygen masks and plane. They always tell you if the oxygen goes out the cabin, the masks come down. Before you help anyone, put the mask on yourself, and then you can concentrate to put the mask on others. That's what happens in worship. We're getting God's fresh air that we can then offer it to others as we go out into the world. And so thirdly is service. So this is a chapter about, most of chapter 8 is about the Levites, but it has something to say to us too. There are obvious differences, so we need to look at them on their own terms and then come to us. So the first thing that happens is they're cleansed. They have a shaving and ritual washing, which is symbolic of what needs to happen to them spiritually. And then there's 2 bulls that are sacrificed, one for their sin, and because Levites are sinners, they deserve death, and the bull is offered in their stead. And the other is a burnt offering. So the idea that the Levites themselves are being offered up to God. And the emphasis is you need to be pure to serve God. Also, we see a substitute. So in Exodus, God kills the firstborn of every house in Egypt. Every house. But among the Hebrews, a lamb is killed in the place of the firstborn, and the blood is put on the doorframe. And from then on, there's this theme of God saying, you owe me the firstborn. And there's a ritual redemption of the firstborn. Saw that at the birth of Christ. So the Levites are a substitute for the rest of Israel. So Israel, instead of them offering their firstborns, Israel is offered, Levi is offered in their place. So they lay hands on the Levites. And the word lay is actually press. In other words, they push their weight down on the Levites. What they did with sacrificial animals. So the Levites are offered. So they say these Levites are the sacrificial animals that we're putting in our place. And then the Levites are offered by Israel to God in their place as a sacrifice. But then the Levites did the same to a bull. They press down so the bull represents them, and then the bull is sacrificed. And so what this means is that the Levites are set apart from some duties for other duties. So now the Levites don't fight in the army, for example, but they guard the tabernacle. They carry the tabernacle according to their divisions and so on. So all of Israel is God's, but Levi is God's in a special way. Israel had given that tribe over to God. And you notice, I didn't read it, but at the end of the chapter, there's age limits. So you can't serve as a Levite before you're 25 or over 50. I'd be too old to be a Levite. At least not to be a Levite, but to do the carrying. After 50, you could still guard, but you weren't allowed to lift things. I can relate to that. Some of you will. Now, before it applies to us, I think that we must first need to see how all this is fulfilled in Jesus, who in turns, through him, he calls us into service. So Jesus, at the start of his ministry, was cleansed in water, being baptized. His baptism identifies him with sinners, although he's sinless, because he's a substitute for them, and he's sacrificed in their place. We deserve death. He takes the death we deserve. Our sin laid on him. He represents us. And he served with his whole heart. I'm sure there's many more connections here as well, but this is just big brushstroke survey. And as Christ, we're part of the priesthood of unbelievers. It's what 1 Peter 2 is all about, and it's an idea we discovered at the Reformation. Before, there'd be this hard distinction between the priest class and the laity. Now, it's a very soft, if anything, distinction. So I'm not a priest, though in my ordination those words were used. Now, elders and deacons and ministers, when they're ordained, and you lay hands on them and you press down, we're saying we're giving and trusting them with the jobs to do, in the same way that Israel is a nation of priests, but some were priests within the nation of priests. But it's interesting in the New Testament, what are the qualifications of a deacon, or of an elder, or of a minister? Well, basically, the qualifications are that they're a Christian, and act like it. They're the same things that all Christians should be doing, but no less. And a minister and elder is exactly the same, but the teaching's added as well. But the focus is on their character. Now, in some cases, like me, I'm set aside from a day job to just pray, preach, and pastor. But very little in the New Testament focuses on the skills, mostly focuses on the character. The character is Christian character. But the main focus in the New Testament is that we are a priesthood together. We have a high priest, Jesus Christ, and then every Christian is a priest. So each Christian, each of you, is set aside as a priest. And that is what holy means. And so you are to consecrate yourself, but you are to be pure. Act according to the status Christ has given you. Now, baptism is an outward display of that cleansing. But we also have a similar role to the Levites. That's not just an appeal to carry stuff to ARU week by week, then if you feel like it, that's okay. But remember, one of the key roles we've looked at with the Levites, who numbers, is that they guard the sanctuary. So the sanctuary is not defiled. Why? Not to protect God. God doesn't need protection, but to protect Israel. So what they don't want is a random Israelite to blunder into the tabernacle and die because they're not holy and prepared to meet God. So your job, you may not have thought of this as a Christian before, when we think about evangelism and making non-Christians welcome and so on, your job to society, your job to Chelmsford and your workplace is to guard the sanctuary. Not to keep them from church. This isn't a tabernacle in that sense. But we live in a dark and sinful world. And as Jesus put it at the end of John 3, whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him. The wrath of God remains on him. For every non-Christian, Jesus said, the wrath of God remains on him. So people think, this is the general, people think it's in the church as well, people think if there's a God, I can just blunder into his presence and talk him round. And then they'll be okay. They think that when they die, they go to heaven, whatever's meant by it. And it's not true. And your job is to stop that. To stop ignorant blundering into God's presence. To say, this world is very wicked, and it is death-loving, and it needs to change. And you, person who I'm chatting to that I love, you will meet God in his blazing holiness, and you will not stand when you do that, as you are. You need to repent and believe in Jesus, who will purify and ready you for God. Nobody can come into God's heavenly sanctuary. If they couldn't go into the earthly one, how much less can they go to their heavenly one? Nobody can enter the city garden that's described at the end of the Bible, the mountain of the Lord, that this tabernacle of numbers symbolises, unless you're prepared by Christ. So just as the Levites prepared the people and they acted as a buffer, so as people wandered through to the tabernacle, they go, "Well, stop. Are you prepared? Have you been purified? Have you got your sacrifices ready?" As a go-between Israel and the tabernacle, then that's the church's job for the world. That is God has set you apart for that job to your office or school or road. And that's why you have to consecrate yourself and be pure. That's what the priesthood of all believers means. It's not that we're all important. That's true. You're all very important. Or it's just we all are. It's just we're all different. As we've seen in the camp layout, we all have different roles, as the Levites have different roles. It's not that we're priests to each other, but we're Levites and priests to the world, to ready the world for a holy God who they will meet one day, as friends or as enemies, one basis or another. So now we're nearly ready for our journey to the promised land, to our promised land, but we need to be ordered as God's community and holy, and now ready for joyful sacrifice as God shines his light and speaks to us, so we shine and speak to the world. And just as we go out, we must be purified to serve God and represent Him in a dark and wicked world. Let's pray.